Okay, I have the 1600 crankshaft mounted up in a bearing plate that's just coming under the second main bearing from the front. And you can see here, this is our camshaft drive gear, our spacer, our distributor drive gear, and then the front main bearing. Now this main bearing is stuck on here, so I've released the snap ring here. And when I start pressing, you'll see that I can get this bearing off. And I've chose to press it off as opposed to trying to pry it off or hammer it off. So you can see as I go through, the bearing's starting to move up. And eventually, this bearing will become free. And then I can inspect the crankshaft for use. If the crankshaft is damaged, then I may have to take it in and have it machined and have the crankshaft cut undersize, and then undersized bearings supporting that, as well as any dimensional differences that are in the engine case. So the bearing isn't loose yet, but you can see we are pressing down. And on my press here, I'm only about 400 or 500 pounds of pressure on this thing. So I don't have the cage in front of it at the moment. I don't see any problems with this thing flying out. So the bearing just came released, and then my snap ring, and it looks like our distributor drive gear now, and our spacer. And I'm going to reach underneath and I'm going to grab the crankshaft. Journal looks a little rough here. The journal looks rough here, and this is actually where the spacer goes onto. So I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to reach underneath and grab the crankshaft now so it doesn't drop. And then we'll take a look at this when we get it out. A little more pressure now, and you can see it's starting to go down fairly well. And there's the crank out. So I'm going to catch the crankshaft and then release the pressure on the press, and then we can take a look at what we just removed. A really rough, stuck, seized bearing, and this came from an engine that was seized that had sat out in the weather for quite some time. And then we have the snap ring that holds the stack-up assembly in place, as well as maintains the position of the distributor drive gear. And you notice this is keyed to the crankshaft snout. And then our spacer, which I'm going to replace with what's called a racer spacer, and it allows this to be one full complete circle. So it's one piece as opposed to a spring type material that could potentially, with high RPMs, open up and cause it to move in the assembly. And then our camshaft drive gear off of the crankshaft, and just looking for the timing mark on it. You can see it's right here. And then of course the second main bearing, which is a full circle bearing. Looks a little rough, but not as rough as the first one that came off. And then we'll just take a quick look at the crankshaft here in just a moment. So here's our crankshaft now disassembled, and you can see this first journal where this bearing rides on is in really rough shape. So I'm going to continue on with the cleaning, and then I will gauge check this and make sure that it is reusable, or I can send it out and have it machined for undersized bearings.